This is GoPowercat.com publisher Tim Fitzgerald. Thank you for listening to this Powercat podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode of the Powercat podcast by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, or your favorite podcast network. And if you enjoy this podcast, please consider becoming a subscriber to GoPowercat.com. We cover the Wildcats like no one else, with our VIP customers enjoying one-of-a-kind coverage from our team of professional journalists. And sign up today for an annual subscription to GPC and grab a 30% discount on your first year. And now here's the Powercat Podcast.
The following is a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. You've discovered your link to GoPowercat.com's Powercat Pregame Podcast, presented by Robbins Motor Company, and it starts right now. Now, let's go to the WTC Gig-Powered Studios. Here's your host, GoPowercat.com publisher, Tim Fitzgerald.
Welcome to the Powercat Pregame Podcast. I'm GoPowercat publisher Tim Fitzgerald, and we are brought to you by Robbins Motor Company. K-State fans, visit the Robbins Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram Fiat location on Anderson Avenue in Manhattan for an exciting test drive. Robbins Motor Company, title sponsor of the Powercat Pregame Podcast. Following a dominating 49-14 win over Nicholls in Chris Klieman's first game as Kansas State's head coach, K-State plays host to Bowling Green at 11 a.m. on Saturday inside Bill Snyder Family Stadium. The contest will be shown on FSN with Chris Vosters on play-by-play and former K-State linebacker Ben Leber serving as color analyst, and we'll have a little bit of Ben on later in this podcast. The game can be heard across the 39-station K-State Sports Network with Wyatt Thompson, Stan Weber, and my buddy Matt Walters calling the action. And after the game, I will be joined by former K-State offensive lineman Brien Hanley on the Powercat Postgame Podcast, brought to you by Caddyshack Golf. Well, K-State opened the Klieman era, rushing for 361 yards in that opener against Nicholls, the most by a Wildcat team in a season opener since 1981, while its 573 yards of total offense ranked as the seventh most in school history for a single game. The Cats held the ball for 41 minutes and 9 seconds in the game, the largest time of possession for a K-State team since 1997 against Texas A&M, and the longest so far this season in college football. 5 different players recorded rushing touchdowns in the opener, while James Gilbert shined in his Wildcat debut, rushing for 115 yards on 18 carries, marking the second most rushing yardage by a Wildcat in their debut. Yes, it was a very good day at the office for the Wildcats, and let's look back at the opening victory and forward to Saturday's game with Bowling Green with the GoPowercat.com staff roundtable session. Riley Gates, D. Scott Fritchen.
Yes, sir.
And Brien Wallace. Well, boys, I think we can all agree that it went better than we probably imagined. Even if you thought it was going to be okay, that was probably a step above that. But let's just get started with the offensive line, because I talked to an ex-player the other day that had a little mixed review. He didn't think the offensive line was as good as advertised, that they were just bigger and they just wore the other team out. But that may not be what they can do come Big 12 play. Let's start with you, Ryan Wallace. What were your thoughts on the O-line play?
Well, coming in, we envisioned that group to be one of the strong suits of the offense, let alone the entire team, just with the amount of experience they had coming back, with Scott France, Adam Holtorf, Tyler Mitchell, even a guy like Nick Kaltmeyer, who maybe to the fan that isn't as engaged for every single snap of every single game might have forgotten the kind of bowl game he had against UCLA a couple years ago. So we even him, we kind of assumed he would be pretty good. And then, Evan Curl beating out Josh Revis kind of said all you need to know about the type of offseason he's had. But so for me, we envisioned them being strong, but I got to disagree with whoever you talked to because, I mean, they were incredibly strong. This is a Nicholls State team that had their leading tackler for loss back, their leading sack man back. There's an active defense. And not only do they, rush for 361 yards and have 573 yards of total offense, Fitz, but I can only remember, and I'll throw it back to you by saying this, I can only remember Skylar Thompson really scrambling, in a broken play, maybe 2-3 times total.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, that touchdown run he had was a designed pass play, and they covered it up pretty well, and he just took off running. But he had the space to do so. At that point, they had spread out the defense, and nobody was home in the middle of that defense. D. Scott, they said what we want to do with the running game is pound, pound, pound until the fourth quarter. There's nothing left of you, and we can have our way. They maybe got there a little bit quicker than that with Nicholls, but certainly by the end of the game, they were just kind of worn out by everything.
I really love what Harry Trotter said after the game, calling them a three-headed monster. And I think three-headed monster is here for the long haul. Plus, you throw in the fact that Tyler Burns was able to be productive as well, especially in the fourth quarter. And you got 4 guys all of a sudden that have more than 10 carries. And I can't remember the last time a K-State team had 4 players with 10 carries. Their 361 rushing yards are the most since 2010. In that 2010 season, they had Daniel Thomas, who, of course, in his debut had over 100 yards rushing. James Gilbert had 115 yards rushing, recognized by 24/7 Sports as one of the outstanding performances by a transfer player in Week 1. I was very encouraged by the running backs. I thought that they stayed fresh. I thought the rotation worked really well. I was really impressed with what Courtney Messingham was able to do with that offensive attack.
That Daniel Thomas guy, he was pretty good as well too. So, pretty impressive that they could meet numbers like that. That offensive line to me, Pro Football Focus graded them the number 1 offensive line unit, in the country this weekend. Now I know, granted, much to the point like you kind of brought up a little bit earlier, yeah. They're not going to face defensive lines like Nicholls. I mean, the defensive lines they face are only probably going to get tougher after this week against Bowling Green. And I'm very open to admitting that. But they were so technically sound. I thought it was one of the more efficient offensive line games I've seen out of K-State recently, just from the standpoint of executing what they needed to do. If you go back on our site, it's probably a little bit buried by now, but Ross Uglum did a great analysis piece on that first game, and he did a little bit of a dive into the offensive line, and they just looked like they were so cohesive together. Obviously some guys have been playing together for a while now, but they just seem to be clicking. I was overly impressed with the offensive line, and I thought they did a phenomenal job, and very telling that Conor Riley, he comes into the press conference this week and says, I was pleased, but hey, there was a 4th and 1 that we didn't get that I wanted, and there was a few plays that we didn't get. So he's not settled, and he's gonna have him bring it again this week.
I would imagine Josh Rivas will be in the starting lineup. He played well. He really did. He was one of the featured guys on that line, and I was happy for the kid because he kind of, in some ways, lost a starting position. We all assumed he was going to be the start at that guard position, and then Curl took it over, but he did respond and play well. But the running backs were pleasing. Ryan Wallace, there's no other way to describe them than a very pleasant surprise. The 2 transfers were good. I think we were all curious about Harry Trotter because he was a walk-on until earlier this year when they gave him a scholarship, and now we see why he got a scholarship. The 3-headed monster, as D. Scott said, it's pretty scary, at least one game in.
Well, yeah, and I think the other thing that you got to like when you watch how each of them operate is they all bring something different. You can use each of the 3 in different ways. I think James Gilbert is probably the most balanced of the 3, and that's maybe why you're going to see him at least, until somebody else rises to the top, so to speak. He's going to be kind of the quote-unquote bell cow, although I think as we've seen, they're all going to get substantial carries. But James can what I was impressed with most about James was the fact that he was able to break tackles because he's kind of the smaller guy of the 3, and he was very slippery, showcased some of his speed and burst out of the backfield, so you had to like that. Jordan Brown was exactly as advertised. shifty, good acceleration. He's a guy that they're going to use a lot in the passing game. You can get him out in the flats and let him do business there. And then Harry Trotter was just, the engine that could. I mean, it seemed like his legs just kept going. No matter how many guys were on him trying to bring him down, he's breaking tackles. He is going to be, a short yardage guy, but also a guy that you can get out on a wheel route similar to Jordan Brown. So you got to like the fact that, and even as we saw on Saturday, you got to like the fact that you can just trot one of them out there, or if you want to, you can actually have all three in the backfield at the same time.
Which we will see at some point this season. I'm guessing Mississippi State, but the fact that they all do a little bit different things, and yet they're similar, can make that diamond formation, if that's what they use out of it, with the three of them, awfully dangerous. I don't know if you're a defense what you do with that, because they can all go out and catch the ball or run the ball and block. So it's very promising. The running game off to a great start. I expect against Bowling Green this Saturday we'll see a whole nother dose of the running game, that they'll want to continue to pound at it. That's not a message they just wanted to send for a game. That's the message this offense sends, period. This is what they want everyone to know. We're going to run the ball at you in a variety of ways, give you a bunch of different looks. Good luck stopping it. One thing that K-State didn't do particularly well was catch the ball. D. Scott, that's something I hope to see improvement in. Skylar, we'll get to Skylar in a second, but Skylar Thompson had a really good day throwing the ball, and if not for about 3 or 4 drops, he has an amazing day throwing the ball.
Yeah, senior Dalton Schoen had a couple that he wished he could have had back. He thought he had the touchdown in the end zone. Didn't it turn out that way? Another time he got kind of turned around on a route, and it would have been gone for a long gain. But Malik Knowles also had a couple drops as well in there. But I was really impressed with the way that Skylar was able to spread the field. 8 different pass catchers in this game.
Malik, if you're going to be the guy, you got to be the guy.
You try not to be too tough on anybody, but especially a kid that, only played in 4 games last year, so you try to temper it a little bit. But also at the same time, summer practices, spring practices, fall camp, they go a long ways to your development. And, there were a couple times where Skylar, I'm thinking one in my head right now where I think he got excited and overthrew Malik Knowles, and you can't really put that one on him. But there were a couple in there where you could see it developing, and you're like, oh, Malik's going to score a touchdown. Oh, the ball bounced off Malik's hands. So disappointing to see that. It's a lot of people are concerned about it, and I'm not saying it wasn't a concern for me. It's just more so I want to see what they do this week. I want to see what they do moving forward, because drops were a little bit of an issue last year. That was something that kind of happened from time to time, but I'm not ready to declare them an issue yet this year. Just kind of got to see how they bounce back from that first game. The first game always brings the jitters, knock the rust off, whatever. So we'll kind of see how Malik responds going into this week.
Wally, we're still in the phase of comparing the two coaches. Bill Snyder did this, Chris Klieman does this, and differences, similarities. But I've got one golden similarity between the two coaches. The depth chart didn't mean a damn thing when it came to starting the game. And that was really true at receiver, where we saw Landry Weber out there on the first snap, Dalton Schoen, and Malik Knowles, who wasn't listed as starter, indeed starting the game. But that didn't really matter, because on the second snap, third snap, fourth snap, it was different guys. Sammy Wheeler didn't come in at tight end. He came in at receiver. So it was awfully fun to watch how they just got everyone involved in that first drive, but really at receiver, it was fascinating to watch the different guys shuffle in and out.
Yeah, we came into this game all, eagerly anticipating the big debut of Joshua Youngblood, who did see substantial time for a freshman in the season opener, although he didn't really have any passes thrown his way, didn't have any stats thrown his way, so he had no chance for a reception. But, besides Landry Weber, Phillip Brooks was in there a lot. We saw Logan Long in there from time to time, who had a pretty solid day as a tight end. Didn't get a chance to see a whole lot of Chabastin Taylor. He did have the one reception for 34 yards on kind of a busted play. So you'd like to see maybe a little bit more of him going forward. But again, these guys are in the game. Jackson Dean caught a pass. They're going to go deep in that depth chart. Like you said, it's not always concrete. I think it gives a good visual indication of maybe who's practicing well and maybe who the coaches have the most confidence in. But it also doesn't mean that they're not going to give other guys the opportunity that they think can either A, help them in the game plan, or B, have the potential to grow from seeing time on the field. And I think that's one thing that these two coaches are different in the sense that I think Chris Klieman knows that if he has a kid that needs a little bit more experience but can grow into potentially an offensive game changer, a defensive game changer, he's going to give them that opportunity. Whereas Bill Snyder was a little bit more rigid and a little bit more traditional and old school in the fact that, you kind of got to earn your way onto the field and, then we'll grow you through practice. I think Chris Klieman is much more willing to give guys a shot and let them learn from mistakes.
Yeah, Fritch, it was fun to watch all the different guys that got to play. And it wasn't about mop-up duty at the end, where they certainly had that. They had guys come in and play, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. They got in there and didn't perform really that great because Nicholls went down the field and scored a touchdown, and Klieman admitted after the game there was guys playing out of position just to fill all the holes. Offensively, you saw the second team line and Tyler Burns churn it up, like you said. But it's really hard to keep track of who's on the field. One of the things I loved about what he was doing was it didn't matter if you were first on the depth chart or third on the depth chart. You better be engaged and involved because you might be in on any drive at any time, depending on what the play call is.
Very much so. And I think that also takes into effect the double reps that they do. They always have to be prepared because they never know when they're going to be in on the double reps. I really liked the way the first drive, especially, had 20 players come in on offense on that first drive, and they had 72 players overall in the game that participated. I like the way that we were able to see so many different players in this opener.
Let's move on to the big guy, Skylar Thompson.
Ooh.
We knew off the field he was a different guy. His demeanor was different. He was more relaxed. He seemed more comfortable in his skin. But that all showed up on the football field too, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you notice guys were, gravitating towards him in the huddle. He seemed like he was more vocal on the field than we've seen him in the past. But, overall, I think the biggest thing for Skylar was when you watched him last year, at times it just seemed like his pocket presence was very impatient, very rattled sometimes, nervous. And in this game, granted, everything's working well for you and you have all day in the pocket, but he just looked relaxed. He looked confident. He knew where he wanted to put the ball. Okay, that's not there. I have time. I'm going to go to my second read and just work my way down the progression. There's no reason to bail out on anything or, try and force a throw. He was accurate, and like I said, he was calm. This was the Skylar Thompson that, everybody in Kansas City knew from his days at Fort Osage. I mean, this is a guy that is a leader, that's confident, calm, and an absolute playmaker. And I think we're seeing that this is the type of system and the scheme and the coaching staff that, he's going to thrive under because, as we've heard them say, from day one, this is your team, this is your offense, and you're our guy. And it's just nice for him to not have that, shadow looming over his shoulder of when am I going to get pulled?
Yeah, I just to touch onto that, I just think it was really noticeable that, if you go back and you kind of look at, K-State football's Twitter account and things like that, he stood up in front of the team after the game and he said, I've never had this much fun playing with you guys before. It was an honor to play with you guys today. And very weird for somebody to say that in the first game of their junior year. You're like, okay, well, it's not your last game ever. It's not the first game of your last year. It's like that game meant a lot to him. And I think that is all you really need to know to understand how comfortable he is here, to understand how much it means to him to have the full trust of his coaches, to understand what it means to him to be able to just play freely. I don't know that we can put into words just how different Skylar Thompson is going to be this year. And I think he's only scratched the surface in showing us the type of player he can be this season. I think he's going to continue to develop, to grow as a leader and as a player. And it can only mean good things for K-State. I mean, look, he's not going to be 16 of 22 with mostly drops every single week. He's not going to be the number 2 quarterback in the country in QBR every single week. but he's going to be pretty dang good this year, and I think he can contend to be one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12 Conference this year.
Let's flip it over to the defense now, D. Scott. We don't know much about the defense after one game. The poor guys played only 41 snaps, and that was as a total defensive unit. The starters probably didn't even break 30 snaps because they were shuffling guys in and out through the whole game. As Denzel Goolsby told me, he woke up on Sunday and he didn't even feel like he had played a game because he'd played so little. We have a lot we need to learn about this defense, but then again, I don't expect to learn a whole lot more in this game either. I think K-State should control the game like they did against Nicholls. Bowling Green might be a lesser opponent even to Nicholls, and if that's true, that means the defense will probably remain a mystery. They won't be on the field a lot, but let's touch on this. Third down. They were so good on third down. That, more than anything, is why they weren't on the field very often. That was the biggest change from last year. Last year, they were miserable on third down. They just give up first downs on third down, almost like they weren't even trying. This time, I think Nicholls had one first down conversion off a third down, and that was just really impressive to watch.
I think Kansas State will be tested just a little bit by Bowling Green. Bowling Green had 101 plays for 620 yards in their season opener. K-State was really good on third down. I think that big plays might be an area where K-State needs to get a little bit better, though, giving up more than 6 yards per play against Nicholls State with about 12 of those plays going for 15-plus yards.
Nicholls did have some luck, Wally, in the middle of that defense. That surprised me. I really thought Nicholls was moving some guys around and getting them out of position. And between the defensive tackles, nose tackle, and the linebackers, there were some flaws in the middle of that defense, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think we might be able to see that change over time. Maybe not this week. You wonder, how many wrinkles Scotty Hazelton really threw in. To the Kansas State fan, it was a big change in defense from the standpoint that, we saw some more blitzing. We saw, just in their alignment, them doing some different things. But at the same time, you also have to wonder, how much were they just kind of in a simple base? How much were they in a man-to-man that they just kind of thought that they could beat Nicholls one-on-one and with better athletes? So, again, we might not be able to see that change too much this week against Bowling Green. They might insert a few more things to, their packages and to their kind of play calls, but that might, again, be something we got to wait for week 3 against Mississippi State to really lock in on.
No sacks. No sacks. They did blitz a little bit more. They did come a little bit more. Nicholls threw the ball, 18 times? And they got some pressure here and there, but they were real cognitive to get the ball out of the quarterback's hand and not expose him to being hit.
You said it right there, because I am a guy that, numbers never lie, and you didn't have any sacks, which I don't think is great, but also at the same time, you're not the only one to say that. Players said it this week. Coaches said it this week. Chase Forcade was getting rid of the ball, and he was getting rid of the ball quick. It was a point, almost to a point where he'd almost make a bad throw and chance an interception rather than get sacked.
He did.
Yeah, he did throw an interception. So, I think that the K-State defensive line still has that ability. We didn't overvalue Reggie Walker and Wyatt Heber. We didn't overvalue Trey Deshawn. It just so happened to be the way that this offense worked against this defense. Now, I'd like to see them get some sacks in this game. I think this is one where they should be able to overpower that offensive line and get back there, even if it is another quarterback that wants to get rid of the ball really quickly. But I think we're going to see them start to record those, and then once they get going, once they kind of figure out how this is going to fit a little bit better, get those rotations going, a lot quicker. You get some fresh guys in there. Maybe those sack numbers start racking up, and then my preseason prediction of 20 sacks between Reggie Walker and Wyatt Hebert is going to start to become true.
You're already behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, that's not good. The averages aren't great.
Ryan Wallace, I know we don't have a lot to go off of, but what did you think of how the secondary played in that opening game?
Well, I think you lead things off with A.J. Parker from a statistical standpoint with his interception. It seemed like Chase Forcade either strayed away from him the rest of the game or, just A.J. Parker might have just been that good. But to me, the guy who really ended up standing out was Jerron McPherson at the nickel position. He was absolutely tremendous against the run and the pass. He finally looked healthy. He finally looked like the guy that we've kind of all been waiting for out of Butler County, who's this freak athlete that can do everything sideline to sideline. He was that guy. And the other guy I think that stood out, that ended up getting the sledgehammer after the game, was Jonathan Alexander, another junior college transfer from Texas that came up and was able to not only strip the fumble but then pick it up for the touchdown. There was just something about Jonathan Alexander that, to me, he still feels like a linebacker. I still want to see him in coverage a little bit more and see how he can cover as a safety or, as a nickel. But to me, he's a difference maker. And the fact that you're able to get guys like Jerron McPherson, guys like Jonathan Alexander incorporated with guys that already have experience that K-State fans can trust a little, and A.J. Parker and Walter Neal. I think that maybe there's more assets in that secondary Fitz than maybe we assumed coming in. It might take them a couple weeks to really grow and really find the rhythm that Joe Klanderman and Van Malone want them to, but they might actually be a little bit deeper there than we initially thought.
Well, I think just the whole demeanor of how the defense is played by Scotty Hazelton. They're in attack mode, and they're not back on their heels. They're not backpedaling constantly. They're not, just kind of sitting back there in soft coverage and letting passes be completed so they can tackle. I think it helped their whole demeanor, the fact that they were able to go out and attack the ball, get into pass patterns and be a little more aggressive. Now they might pay the price for that later in the season, but I think it built their confidence. I thought Walter Neal played really well. Every time I watched him, he was doing a great job in coverage, and he probably is enjoying being at cornerback instead of being in that battering ram at nickelback. Let's bring this thing to a full circle here, D. Scott. Special teams. There wasn't much of it. What we saw wasn't particularly special. That's still my big question mark heading into this game.
Well, if I can say one thing, Phillip Brooks, I think he's got some athleticism to him, a little bit of wiggle, as Coach Snyder used to call it back in the days of Darren Sproles. I think special teams with the kickoffs and the punts, I think those are going to be in good hands. I want to see a little bit of punting, but other than that,
that's a weird thing to ask for.
No, I thought, I was a lot, and Phillip Brooks did impress because we didn't get to see a whole lot out of him last year. He does have that speed that they've been talking about for a while. My concern was, and it's a small concern, was just that missed field goal from Blake Lynch. I hate to pound a kid over one missed field goal. I earlier said everybody kind of gets a mistake or two, but that was a distance he was 5 of 5 on last year, and I honestly considered it a chip shot for him. We'll see how he bounces back from that if he gets another attempt at a field goal this week. If he does and he doesn't really start to come around on it, you got to start to wonder if maybe Ty Zentner might get in there a little bit, because we saw him handle some kickoff duties, and man, he sure does have a leg on him, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. It was impressive. Ryan Wallace, they opened the season, and everyone kind of had this sense of uncertainty what was going to take place against Nicholls. One game later, everyone seems to have a sense of confidence against Bowling Green. I'd imagine reality's a little bit in between those two, but is there reason to be concerned about this Bowling Green team?
Probably not. For starters, anybody that dresses in brown and orange as their colors, you're not looking sharp. You're probably not going to play sharp. To me, I think this is K-State fans got to take this one again with a grain of salt, much like Nicholls. I thought Nicholls had maybe some better skill position players than we'll see from Bowling Green. That's just my estimation, and that might go back to when you asked earlier, Fitz, about the openings in that defense. They might have not wanted to get beat over the top, and that created some things underneath. But I think with Bowling Green, they're going to lack a little bit of that athleticism, and even more so, they're going through a first-year head coach in Scot Loeffler, still trying to learn some schemes there, still trying to bounce back and get some confidence. Obviously, beating Morgan State, regardless of what you think of Morgan State, will breed some sort of level of confidence. But again, I'm not so sure that there's going to be a whole lot when we sit here next week that we're going to be able to really say definitively about this K-State team. I do think that this will be another runaway for the Wildcats, and hopefully, they stay grounded enough and focused enough to not lose sight of the fact that they still got an awful lot left to prove in Week 3 in Starkville.
He is Ryan Wallace. Riley Gates and D. Scott Fritchen are to my right and left. And that was the GoPowercat.com roundtable. We appreciate everyone joining in on this. And after this break, we will continue with our pregame podcast with the analysts. They're all lined up, one after another. We got 4 of them right after this pause.
The experts from GoPowercat.com will return with more on the Powercat Pregame Podcast, presented by Robbins Motor Company.
Imagine the softest sheets you've ever felt. Now imagine them getting even softer over time. I'm here to tell you about Boll & Branch and how you can discover this new level of softness with their iconic sheets. In a recent customer survey, 96% responded that Boll & Branch sheets get softer with every wash. They source the rarest 100% organic cotton for an incredible softness to start. Then they skip the toxins and harsh chemicals for a natural feel unlike anything else, and it all comes together with their signature weave. This special design feels buttery, breathable, and unlocks new levels of softness with every wash, and they stand behind their promise of softness. With their 30-night guarantee, you can wash, style, and sleep in their sheets for an entire month. If during the 30 nights you don't love your sheets or feel them getting softer and softer, you can send them right back. No questions asked. So head to bollandbranch.com for 15% off your first order with code Odyssey. That's BOLL and branch.com. Exclusions apply. See site for details.
Picture this nightmare scenario. You're hosting friends for the big game. It's neck and neck in the fourth quarter, and suddenly you realize you're out of drinks. You start to sweat. Your friends start to turn on you. You're forced to go on a last-second drink run and end up missing the game-winning touchdown while in line. Terrifying, isn't it? Luckily, you can avoid the drama with Drizzly, the go-to app for drink delivery. With Drizzly, you can shop a huge selection of beer, wine, and spirits, then get them delivered right to your watch party. Compare prices across multiple stores in your area, find the best deals on game day drinks, and get back to armchair quarterbacking from, you guessed it, your armchair. Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com today. Must be 21 plus, not available in all locations.
We now send it back to the Powercat Podcast. Joining you once again, it's Tim Fitzgerald and GoPowercat football analyst Marcus Watts.
And now let's kick off the analyst section of the Powercat Pregame Podcast, sponsored by Robbins Motor Company, by bringing in our football analyst, the one and only Marcus Watts. I hope he's the only one. Let's be honest about this. But first, let me do this. The dedicated team of automotive professionals at Robbins Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Fiat will match you with a vehicle that suits your lifestyle and budget. Robbins Motor Company, title sponsor of the Powercat Pregame Podcast. And now here he is, Marcus Watts, from somewhere out there in the world, parts unknown.
Yeah, not in studio this week.
I know.
Somewhere in the
It was
abyss.
Nice to have you in studio for once, but now you've gotten away from us, which is a wise move. Well, first of all, last week was impressive. They looked good for the most part. You really can't learn much from the defense, and I want to talk to you about that, certainly. But, that's probably about as good as you can expect from an opener for a new coach. They just got it done and did so efficiently.
Yeah, obviously I was pleasantly surprised and very happy with how K-State came out and, took it right to them. And we kind of knew going into this game that it was going to look kind of like an old Coach Snyder football team, grounding and pounding. But I didn't realize that it was going to – I remember texting you during the game. I'm like, deja vu or something. It's just – it was nice because that kind of brand of football is something I like personally.
Right, I do.
And I think it – clashes with what teams run in the Big 12 and what they're used to, so it gives you a leg up on teams that you're playing because you're not playing as they're not going. Our K-State doesn't run the spread, so other teams see passing all day. So, but it was nice to see. One person that I watched really closely in this game was Skylar Thompson.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to see how he progressed with the new coaching staff because of how so inconsistent and tentative he looked all of last year. He looked so uncomfortable last year. And what I saw now granted it's just one game, what I saw from Skylar was like light years ahead of where he was at any time last year. So I was happy.
Yeah, there's not much to be upset about, but maybe some issues on defense. They only played 41 snaps as a total unit, and the starters only played about 30 or fewer. They were well rested, let's put it that way. They should feel pretty good going into this game. You could see some blown assignments in there, particularly in the middle of the defense. And I think Bowling Green, which wants to run the ball, the Falcons ran for, 326 in their opener on 63 attempts. So I thought K-State ran it a lot. The Falcons are going to get after it too. And I guarantee it, when they flipped on the video of K-State's game, they saw something in the middle of the defense that maybe they can take advantage of, because that's where that's where Nicholls had some success.
Where K-State struggled, from what I saw, especially on that touchdown run that they had up the middle, was when they had the jet motion. The linebackers were getting their eyes in the backfield, and we're kind of going with the flow of the jet motion and trying to react to that. When they scored that touchdown run, K-State had it fitted perfectly, except for Elijah Sullivan went into the gap where Wayne Jones already was, and so he missed his assignment. He was supposed to fill the A gap. He went out to the outside gap, and there was a K-State player there, and they left the hole wide open. So it's one of those things that's a very coachable moment. Keep your eyes on your keys and do your responsibilities and try not to do somebody else's. Trust that your teammate is going to be in the position that he's going to be in. And I think, last year, K-State probably didn't have a lot of trust in each other. And so they're still building that trust through games. And obviously you can do it in practice and stuff, but once you get in the games, it's a lot faster, happens a lot quicker. And so it'll get corrected, and I think they'll be fine. But I look for Bowling Green to maybe throw some of that quick jet motion and more motions to try to confuse K-State's linebackers into overplaying plays and not being assignment sound.
Well, that is a concern, because Bowling Green will kind of mimic what K-State does with all that pre-snap motion and getting people trying to move you around. So if they're successful in that, they will have some offensive success. They certainly did against a much lesser Morgan State team, but we'll see how that transpires. But I just want to see advancements from this defense, because we really didn't get to see much, but it's kind of a double-edged sword. If we get to see a lot more in this game, that probably means Bowling Green's having some success offensively and staying on the field. If K-State can get them in those third down situations and stop them and get them off the field, which they were marvelous at, we'll probably be in the 40s again with offensive snaps for the opposition. And, it takes both sides of the ball, but the defense did their job. They got off the field and didn't do much work. And at the end of the day, that's exactly what you want to do as a defender.
That's correct. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. You want to see more out of your defense. You want them to get more snaps. But, hey, if they're getting 3 and outs, that's perfect. That's what you play the game. That's what you play defense for, is to get 3 and outs, to get takeaways, which they got, on that first series. So they did everything that they were supposed to do. Right. So will they see probably more snaps in this game? I would think so. I think Bowling Green might pose a little bit more of a competition, because there's actual game film on K-State now,
right?
And what Chris Klieman and them are going to do with this team and players that they have in on the team. Do I think they probably will get a little more defensive snaps? Yes. Do I think it's going to be a close game? Probably not, but it's too early to tell. I try not to get too high. I try not to get too low. But it's hard not to be looking ahead and thinking positively about where this team is compared to where they were at any point last year.
Is this a weird balancing act for a new coaching staff? They want to move their team forward. They have claimed not to fear putting much on film. They say they'll just run what they need to run, but they really didn't run much. I mean, that was their basic stuff. It might have looked fancy because we'd never seen it before, but that was kind of what they do. And defensively, they really didn't have to show much. They probably want to do a little bit more in this game game, but then again, they don't want to put a whole bunch out there for the Mississippi States and Oklahoma States of the world to see.
Yeah, we kind of talked about it earlier. I mean, even though they may do a little bit more, what they're going to be doing against a team like Bowling Green that likes to run the ball is not what they're going to see from offenses in the Big 12. So you're really not going to be putting much on film. Yeah, if that makes any sense. So, I would just stick to your game plan, stick to your base stuff, the stuff that the players know and that they run well and have been learning through camp. And then you add wrinkles in throughout the season, depending on the teams that you're playing. And so, the whole showing too much and not showing a lot and all that kind of stuff, I think that's all just talk, frankly, because there's not really anything exotic that these offensive coaches haven't seen. Now, K-State may come out in a 3-4 against some of these teams, and that may be something that the other teams weren't expecting. And so that's when you kind of throw exotic stuff at a certain team that may not run the ball as much and may just want to throw it all over the place. And so those are the type of exotic differences of defenses that you run and how you defend the teams that would catch an offensive coordinator from another team off guard.
Look, they can talk about running back by committee. I'm going to still think I'm not a fan of that. And then I got to see running back by committee from Courtney Messingham, offensive coordinator, and Brien Anderson, running backs coach. And now I'm a fan of running back by committee. That was masterfully done. And granted, it helps you're having success. But to have 4 guys get 10 or more carries, including your main guy, James Gilbert, getting 18 carries and going over 100 yards. Speaking of scripting plays, you couldn't script that any better for the K-State offense. They established that they have a well-rounded rushing attack, and this is a team that returned no experienced running backs. It's incredible.
Yeah, thank God for the transfer portal. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Get 2 guys out of that.
Look, running back by committee works if you've got 3 capable running backs or 4 capable running backs. If you're running a running back by committee just to save a guy or, a snap here or a snap there, then it really doesn't work. Obviously, I think they would like a guy to be the guy, but, they're going to still keep that guy fresh. It's a long season.
Yeah.
And James, a lot of these transfers, they've already played 3-4 years of college. And so, they've had a lot of wear and tear. Running backs have a lot more wear and tear than any other position on the field. And so the more you can keep each and every guy fresh, the better. And, they're going to go with the hot hand. That's the good thing about having 3 capable guys is, James Gilbert may have a bad game and he may only get 8 carries. Well, Trotter may be having a great game and may get the 18 or 20 carries. Yeah. That's the thing. You don't know. And they're all different in their ways. Some of them are a little bit quicker. Some of them will maybe a little bit faster. But I think K-State fans should be, not looking for is they're not going to have a game breaker. You're not going to see those 60, 70-yard runs. Now you'll see one every once in a while, but they're not going to be like a Darren Sproles making guys miss and stuff. They're going to get out there and ground and pound it. And, hey, I love it.
Yeah, it was fun. There's no doubt about it. They substitute like crazy. These coaches shuffle guys in and out. Well, there was 20 players on that opening drive. Defensive players, even the starters were under 30 snaps typically. You have to be on your toes if you're on this roster. You might be 3rd on the depth chart, but get in on the first series. It was one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen a coaching staff do. They weren't just talking about playing people. Boom. They played people right out of the gate, and that's so motivating. If you're one of those younger guys that's buried on the depth chart, that doesn't mean you're not playing. You might play, and if you have a good game, if you perform well, you're going to play even more.
Yeah, and I think it's something you can do early on in the season, something you can do when you're playing in Nicholls State and you're dominating, playing at Bowling Green if you dominate Bowling Green. But once I get into those tough games, as a player, I wouldn't want to be coming in and out because you get out of the flow and rhythm of the game. It's hard to, if you're coming out for a couple plays here or a series here and stuff, it's hard to keep in the rhythm, keep engaged in the game. And I don't know if they'll do that as much. I think you'll see the substitutions go down as they get into more tougher games. But if they're dominating like they have been and keeping guys fresh and it's working, then they may keep it up. But they're probably trying to see what they have because they've been able to see it in practice and stuff and going against each other, and that's just not the same. So I think these first two games, they're going to see what they have in players. When Alexander got in there, he was phenomenal. That strip was something that, I wasn't expecting him to have it, but that's a football player.
Right.
You just know that's a football player. And so, that's a guy that you're like, well, maybe we need to get him in there a little bit more because he can he's got a nose for the ball. Those are things that, you don't maybe expect so much, with young guys out at the beginning, but you may see it in those first couple games that might tempt you to play them a little bit more.
Very good. I also have a deep bench, so it's time to send you to the bench and bring in someone different. Thank you, Marcus. And now let's bring in Big B, Brien Hanley. He joins me on the post-game podcast, and this time we get to do it during daylight hours. K-State and Bowling Green kick off at 11, so I don't know. We'll probably record around 4, and it'll be up by 5 for everyone to enjoy. A little bit later night last week with that win over Nicholls, but boy, that was fun to talk about, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great start to the season. Couldn't have asked for anything more. Just one game, I get it, but it was just an outstanding start to the season.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a lot easier to convince yourself it's just one game when it's really good than when it's really bad, because then you go into panic mode.
That's right.
But
That's exactly right.
It was one game. We'll see if they can back it up. They should be able to back it up against a Bowling Green team that won its opener convincingly against Morgan State. They ran the ball quite well. In fact, they kind of mimic each other in how they won their games, scoring in the 40s and controlling the tempo of the game with an offense that likes to run the ball and shift alignments and do a lot of pre-snap motion, and it's just kind of funny. K-State in some ways will be looking into a mirror with a team with the new coach at Bowling Green. But this is a case, Brian, of just stay the course, isn't it? Just pick up where you left off and continue to do the same stuff.
That's right. This is another game where the competition is going to be a little bit tougher, but this is still another game where it's all about us. We just need to go out there, do what we do, continue to just play hard, play fast, and do the things that are going to be successful. And, again, we should be fine. We should be fine. Again, that's not discounting the competition or anything like that. But if we go and execute and continue to do those things the right way, this is another game that we should be able to take and start building momentum.
Right. Do what you do and do it well, and don't make mistakes along the way, which was something they did a great job with in that opening game against Nicholls with only 2 penalties and 0 turnovers. And that's a nice day right there. That's getting it done. And you can't open the door for this is tough to say it this way, lesser opponent and let them sneak in with your own mistakes. So staying clean is very important, and cleaning up mistakes, because as hard as it is to believe, there were mistakes in that game, and on defense, you could see some alignment issues, and maybe on offense on those first couple snaps, they didn't fire off the ball like they want to. But when you're building a program, you've got to take these steps, and this is another building block. You've got to have this on the base of your foundation.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we've seen it all around the country already this year. I mean, look at some of the upsets that we've seen. I mean, Tennessee, I mean, what has happened to them? So K-State is in a position to where we just need to keep doing what we do and do it well, because if you don't, things like that can happen. So we just need to stay focused, one game at a time, one play at a time, and good things will happen.
I agree. I look for Skylar Thompson maybe to throw the ball a little more in this game. I'm not sure. It kind of probably depends on how this game's going. If they get away quickly, I bet it's a whole bunch more running. But as you've stopped and reflected on what took place, and we talked about this on the post game, that running attack and what the offensive line did, that's going to win you a lot of football games, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, a ton of football games. I mean, anybody that can run the ball the way that we ran the ball, I mean, any team that's going to be able to do that, you're going to put yourself into position to win a lot. Now, obviously, the competition is going to get a little bit more tougher as we go along in the season. But if we can still run the ball well, I'm not saying to the tune of what we ran it last Saturday, but if we can run the ball well then we're going to be in very, very good position to keep ourselves in games and win a lot of games.
Yeah, 361 yards on the ground. 5 different guys scored touchdowns, including 4 different running backs and Skylar Thompson. I thought Skylar was marvelous, and I went back and watched some of the game, and he really only had 1 or 2 not even bad throws, just a little bit off throws. The rest of the time, he was on the money.
Yeah, he played very, very well. I was really excited. I know I've said it before, and obviously the quarterback is going to be the key to your season, but he is really the key to our season this year. I mean, I loved what he did. I love the start that he got off to, coming off of last year, inconsistencies, with his play, in getting playing time, and then just being the guy. He just played very, 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 very well. Very well.
You can go boil down a whole bunch of stats from that first game, and you can look at this and that, and rushing yardage and time of possession, which was a monstrous 41-19. But at the end of the day, K-State was better on third down. They converted third downs. Nicholls couldn't get it done against the K-State defense that hemorrhaged third down conversions a year ago, and that really set a tone. I would like to say I want to see more from the defense, but you know what? If they get the opponent off the field at third down, it's not their fault they're not on the field enough.
Exactly.
I mean, they're doing what they're supposed to do.
That's right. There's nothing wrong with that. If I know we want to see more, we want to see them do more, and they will have to do more. But you know what? Hey, set the tempo. I agree. Set the tempo early. This is what we're going to do. We're going to get off the field on third down. So if we can be consistent on defense and continue to do that down the road, more power to them.
Scotty Hazelton, the defensive coordinator, made a big deal last week talking about how they weren't going to be vanilla. And compared to Bill Snyder, they weren't. They did have a few blitzes, a few things they did on defense. But honestly, they didn't do much on defense. They really just kind of lined up and defended in pretty base packages and just let the guys get comfortable with their duties and not confuse them. And that is really important in a new defensive system.
It's key to just let guys just go out there and run around and play fast.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear it all the time, play fast. Well, it's a lot easier to play fast when you just, hey, here's the assignment, this is what you do, when things are being simplified. So it's a lot easier. And it's not that, Nicholls wasn't running different combinations and formations and things of that nature. It was just, hey, we're lining up. This is what we're doing, and we're going to run around and play fast. I think that's very, very key, and they did a really good job of that last week.
How much confidence does a team build off a performance like that? I know it's hard for you to, pinpoint having a new coach and those type of things, but that's really got to build their belief system. They've believed in the systems. They've believed in what these coaches are telling them and teaching them, but to put it into practice and see it blossom in front of you has got to be very reinforcing.
It does. And here's the thing, Tim. They didn't go to a bowl game last year.
Yeah.
So we're coming off a losing season. So any success that the guys have is going to build their confidence. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't believe that they should have won the game, but you know what? Winning is winning.
Yeah.
And getting off to a good start is getting off to a good start. And building that confidence and, hey, you know what? This is a new system. This does work. Because as players, they hear all the chatter. They hear the things that people are saying, hey, it's a new regime. We don't know. The coach is coming from, FCS and all that kind of stuff. They hear all of that. So getting out there and actually putting what you've been working for all this time and putting it out there and having success is going to do nothing but breed confidence.
Yep, that's very true. Well, let's save a little bit of good stuff here for the post-game podcast. I'll hit you up about 90 minutes after the game, after I get back from the Chris Klieman press conference, and we will do it again. We'll do it at least 12 times this season, and maybe if Chris Klieman turns out to be the absolute stud coach that some people hope he is, we'll do it 15 times and end up in New Orleans. How's that sound?
That sounds good to me.
Let's talk about reading too much into one game over Nicholls. There we go. Thank you, Brien. I appreciate it very much, and we will talk to you in a few days.
Absolutely.
And now we go to Vegas, where we all always want to go, and our friend Kelly Stewart. Kelly in Vegas, KIV proxy service, that website, wagertalk.com. What else you got? Star, the Showtime series, Action.
Bleacher Report at BR_betting for all the degenerates. I saw a tweet this morning. A guy wants more Vegas.
I know.
And I said, well, hey, I've got all the Vegas. You just have to find it.
I know. That's something different. I'm just here to talk about K-State. And he wants all Kelly talking
all the time.
And who doesn't, honestly? You know what? I think last week I thoroughly proved why nobody should take gambling advice from me. I thought the spread of 23.5, which is what we were thinking the spread would be, and it was way too high, and they covered.
Yes, and you know what? Like I said, though, I didn't have the guts to take it, Tim. I didn't know what we were going to get. There's several NFL games that fit that exact same situation. There's just like, you know what? We don't know what we're going to get from a team, so you don't force a bet. And that's how I feel about K-State. Listen, we are all a little gun-shy. Mr. Bill Snyder didn't like to cover big numbers.
Nope.
And subsequently lost a couple times as a big favorite. So for me, I just was like, let's just hang out. And I only got to catch glimpses of the game online. I was watching a lot of other games that morning, and I was, for one, just ecstatic to see there was time left on the clock. There was the play clock. There were, fourth down situations. There were gutsier calls, not, anything super crazy, but there were some glimpses of, oh, my God, we might be a real Power 5 school.
Yep, there was no 4-yard passes on 3rd and 5. They threw 6 yards. It seems basic, but that's what they did. It looked really good. They looked good, but here's another week. You never know what you're going to get sometimes. It's still too early to, have him be the second coming in our minds. But Chris Klieman seems to have a good start here, and now Bowling Green rolls into town with a new coach, a program that's been struggling. And what's the number you're seeing right now for the spread?
Well, also 23.5, just like last week. I do think this number is a little bit high. Both teams absolute routes last week. But if you want me to tell you what Vegas is saying about this game, it's going to be a 21-point game. Listen, Bowling Green 1-10 as a double-digit non-conference underdog, but 45-26 against the spread on the road. This is just, there's a lot of conflicting things here. Listen, I'm just, again, not ready to back K-State laying just a tad too many points just yet. Listen, there are teams, Nick Saban, we see it. Last week, I took the 35 with Duke, and for the first half, I was in the game. For a better part of the second half, I was cussing myself mentally going, why did you do this? You knew this is what he does. He goes for it twice on 4th down when he really doesn't have to. And until I see Klieman do things like that says, hey, I would not know the spread, obviously, but hey, I know that we need to beat a team by a certain number of points to prove to some sort of committee. I don't know if I'm willing to lay down my hard-earned money to do that.
And your money is hard-earned. I sit around and do this all day, so mine is not hard-earned, and I still would not bet it. I don't know. I'm the same way. I'm not ready to we all want to be overjoyed about that game and about what it possibly means last week, but it's one game, and it's too early, and let's get down the road a little farther.
Yes, absolutely. Listen, there are going to be plenty of times this season where we can bet Kansas State, probably at Mississippi State, depending on how they play this week.
Right.
I was not impressed with them over Louisiana Lafayette. They were laying a big number as well and were unable to get it done. So I'm looking at K-State as a road underdog. In that spot, I'm looking at them versus Texas. I'm looking at them versus OU. I'm looking at them versus Iowa State. Pump the brakes, K-State fans. There are going to be plenty of opportunities where K-State is going to be able to be bettable. Or a lot of people tend to do the emotional hedge, as we call it, Mr. Fitz.
Yep.
Where they bet against K-State. And if K-State wins but doesn't cover, they win both. If K-State loses outright, well, at least I bet against them. I get that. I am not one of those bettors unless there is a very slim chance that I really think that they're just going to lay an egg, most notably usually in Ames. But the tide has turned to names. Matt Campbell, as an underdog, is no more. Matt Campbell laying a ton of points, as we saw last week against Northern Iowa, may be a scary proposition this year.
He said, Bill Snyder, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to be so conservative, I barely win the game. And that's what they did. It was painful to watch.
It was crazy. That game was like on the right of my peripheral when I was watching the 3 or 4 games I had action on that morning. And I was going, I knew I should have bet Northern Iowa. And those are the worst kind of bets where you're like, why did I talk myself out of that again? But, in all seriousness, there was a couple of Big 12 teams that looked really good and a couple that didn't look so good. So KU didn't get the cover. Well, depending on when you bet it,
right,
against Indiana State. I don't think KU gets the cover again this week. I'm actually looking at taking the points with Coastal Carolina.
What's it at, 10? Somewhere around there?
Yeah, I think last I saw was at 8, 9, couple different spots. But, yeah, it'll get bet up. I do think that KU just, again, is not a team that I'm willing to lay points with, whether at home or not. And Puka Williams is back for KU. Maybe that's going to help them. But, man, I don't know.
I agree.
Les Miles, 22, 34-1 versus the points in his last 57 as a head coach. KU now 3-10 in their last 13 games at Memorial Stadium. I'm not laying points with this KU team. If anything, I'm taking them.
I would agree. Anything else jumping out at you out there?
I get a lot of people asking me about Texas LSU, right, and I just don't think that's a game I want to touch. Tom Herman, we know, Ohio State, Houston, now Texas as an underdog. He's catching points. And I'm not laying the points with LSU. Listen, I lean towards Texas, but I think everybody and their brother is going to take the points with Texas. The line's going to come down. So if you like it, play it now. This is just not a game that Kelly in Vegas is willing to get involved in. I just don't see it being anything other than a crapshoot, coin flip, Auburn, Oregon type situation that I just want no part of. Everybody's like, I can't believe you didn't bet that game. Thank God I didn't bet that game. I only have so many brain cells left. I would have lost my mind. It would have been terrible. So, you have to look at that. And I think, honestly, you're going to laugh because I did bet against West Virginia last week and push with James Madison. I kind of like West Virginia this week at Mizzou.
How about that spread? What are you showing? Missouri about 12 or
14.
something? That's 14. Crazy. They just lost to Wyoming.
And they did just lose to Wyoming. So this is the thing you have to think about this game. Where are we overreacting? Are we overreacting to how poorly West Virginia played against James Madison? Are we overreacting to Missouri losing to a pretty good Wyoming team in Craig Bull? K-State fans, you probably remember that name. It still haunts me to this day. So that being said, we maybe overlooked how good Wyoming was. Missouri's going to be okay, but that's too many points. I think West Virginia comes to play in that game. Anywhere else in the Big 12 we really need to talk about? I guess we can make fun of Nebraska.
Yeah. Well, that whole division in the Big 10 is a mess. That Western or
I said this to somebody the other day. I signed up a bunch of Nebraska fans for the proxy service, and they're like, why do you still hate us? I'm like, you guys gave me PTSD from my childhood. I don't know what else to tell you. And I go, I just love how bad you are in the Big 10. There's something about it. I'm like, I love this so much. And I do think Frost with time is going to be better. And I do think he's going to get that team more well-rounded. That being said, man, I'm enjoying it while it lasts.
I agree. I think they're going to get it rolling eventually because he's too good of a coach, but it's fun to see. They should have never left. Instead of being a big boy in the Big 12, they're nobody in the Big 10.
Who left first? Nebraska left first, or?
I think they did. I can't remember.
I think they started the whole dissolution of
Missouri started it, but I think Nebraska bolted.
Okay.
So we can hate them both.
Exactly, right? That was funny. I had a KU fan the other day that said, well, I don't hate K-State. He's like, we beat you guys in basketball. And I'm like, well, not this year, sir. But anyway, and vice versa in football. He goes, can we all just agree we hate Missouri? I'm like, fine. I don't hate Missouri.
It brings us together.
we can agree that Missouri is a terrible place.
Her name is Kelly Stewart. She is Kelly in Vegas on Twitter, on Instagram, on probably social media I've never heard of. And she is darn good at her job. If you need a little gambling advice, go find her. She's got a new podcast. What's that?
Kelly and Murray is a new podcast where I hang out with literally behind the scenes of the sportsbook with one of the executive sportsbook directors over at the Westgate, and I get all the good inside information that everybody wants to know.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you don't sell your service. You do your proxy service, but
right. So I don't sell picks anymore. I did for a long time, and it was under the umbrella of, hey, if you're going to do the work anyway, charge people. And now I just charge large media corporations instead.
Good. I like it. She doesn't charge us, as far as I know. She's just been our friend for a long, long time, and we get this for free.
Since about 1993.
Yep. Thank you, Kelly. Be careful out there. It's Vegas, and weird stuff goes on.
Absolutely, Tim. Thanks for always having me on.
And we've got one more stop to make on our tour of analysts leading up to this game with Bowling Green. And his name is Ben Leber. He'll be on the color call on the television broadcast on FSN. RD Scott Fritchen caught up with Ben a little bit earlier in the week. That Q&A is up for our VIP subscribers at GoPowercat.com. But here's just a little snippet of their conversation about what Chris Klieman's doing at Kansas State.
I want your thoughts, but around the Flint Hills, this was quite a shock Saturday. 573 total yards for K-State, tied with the 1998 team for seventh most in school history in a single game, and 361 rushing yards, the most in a season opener since 1981. K-State had the worst offense in the Big 12 a year ago. What catches your eye about the Klieman offense?
Just running the ball. Trying to change his stripes on who he is as a coach. I mean, you don't have to watch North Dakota State very long to realize, all right, that's a run first pro style offense that is going to attack you in the trenches and make you bow up and have to play at their physical level. And I think that's something that needs to come back to football in general. That's something that needs to come back to college football, especially in the Big 12. And I think it's doing that. You look at what Iowa State is doing with their emphasis on run the football and playing good defense. Even Texas is sort of changing their stripes on at least their attitude about physical play, focusing on defense. Oklahoma, with Alex Grinch now as a defense coordinator, they're all about taking the ball away and playing tough defense. Matt Wells, his philosophy is the same thing. So, and then you get the blue bloods like Gary Patterson at TCU. So I think that it falls in line with where I think that football needs to get back to, that we're going to win with our offensive and defensive line, and we're going to make you run downhill and try to stop us, and getting back to that sort of old school mentality. And it's working. At least worked for one game. It worked at a high level of FCS, which, I will put my stamp on the fact that the top 10 of the FCS could absolutely compete at the FBS level, just with the talent and the coaching that's there. So that's some good looking football that he had at North Dakota State, and hopefully that is a full transition at Kansas State for a long time.
Klieman's made a point to say this is Skylar Thompson's team, and Skylar told me after the game this was the best game of his career this past Saturday. Skylar's no longer looking over his shoulder at Alex Delton and really learned that Courtney Messingham playbook over the offseason. He appears more confident than ever before. How would you assess Skylar Thompson these days?
Looser. I mean, he even said it himself. It was the most fun that he's ever felt walking off a field. And I think that just speaks volumes to, again, what the culture that Klieman has already sort of injected into that program, where, not to say that we didn't have fun under Snyder, but it was very much a business-like atmosphere, and you were always left walking off the field like what you could have done better. And there are times where you just wanted to say, man, can we just enjoy this for 24 hours before you tell us, what we need to improve on and what we did wrong? It seems like Skylar already has like a bounce in his step, and he's making quicker decisions. And I think that he's allowed to feel like he can make a mistake without, the shepherd hook coming out to grab him and put somebody else in there. This idea that players have to play perfect is the wrong approach I think a lot of coaches make. And I think the best teams are the teams that can play free. and they're allowed to make mistakes. You just have to make full speed mistakes. And as long as Skylar can do that and feel like he has that ability to make a full speed mistake and not get the shepherd hook, then I think he's going to be a better quarterback for it.
And that's it for our analyst section of the Powercat Pregame Podcast. We'll be back on the other side with a couple quick interviews and my 5 keys. We're almost done getting you ready for Kansas State and Bowling Green playing Saturday at Bill Snyder Family Stadium.
What are the keys to a Wildcat victory? It's next on the Powercat Pregame Podcast, presented by Robbins Motor Company.
Picture this nightmare scenario. You're hosting friends for the big game. It's neck and neck in the fourth quarter, and suddenly you realize you're out of drinks. You start to sweat. Your friends start to turn on you. You're forced to go on a last-second drink run and end up missing the game-winning touchdown while in line. Terrifying, isn't it? Luckily, you can avoid the drama with Drizzly, the go-to app for drink delivery. With Drizzly, you can shop a huge selection of beer, wine, and spirits, then get them delivered right to your watch party. Compare prices across multiple stores in your area, find the best deals on game day drinks, and get back to armchair quarterbacking from, you guessed it, your armchair. Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com today. Must be 21 plus, not available in all locations.
We now send it back to Fitz in the WTC gig-powered studios.
Now we bring it down the home stretch of this week's pregame podcast, brought to you by Robbins Motor Company. I'll have my 5 keys to victory here in just a little bit. And Riley Gates will step in with an interview with offensive line coach Conor Riley. At Robbins Motor Company, they strive to earn lifetime business and build relationships, selling quality cars, trucks, vans, and SUVs, and offering top-notch parts and service. Robbins Motor Company, title sponsor of the Powercat Pregame Podcast. Well, it's easy to talk about the running backs when you rush for 361 yards and have 5 different guys score on rushing touchdowns in your season opener. But don't forget that offensive line. They were pretty darn dominant. They're senior-laden, and they're coached now by Conor Riley. And here's Riley Gates with Coach Riley.
After an offensive line performance like that, you're looking for things to coach up, but I got to imagine you're in a pretty good mood after that game.
Yeah, I was pretty pleased with how hard the guys played, but kind of like what we assumed, there was quite a few things that we still need to work on, and I think that's kind of the exciting part is in visiting with them. First thing I told them Monday is our biggest improvement has to be from week 1 to week 2. So we're looking for quite a bit of improvement this upcoming week.
I had to go through a little bit of adversity there when Scott went down with the injury, but you guys really just kind of picked it up and ran with it. You know, I guess the next man mentality, you kind of had a system going already. Were you impressed with how smoothly things went despite losing a guy like Scott there for a little bit?
Well, with the experience of the guys that we're fortunate to have up front, I kind of anticipated that they would handle a little adversity like that pretty well. So we obviously shuffled quite a few guys around in order to get what I would have considered the best 5 out there at that time. And guys handled it really well. They didn't balk at it, and we were fortunate enough to get Scott back in the second half.
Adam was telling us yesterday that one of the things he's kind of worked the hardest with transitioning from Coach Dickey to you is rather than going kind of like a horizontal type movement, you encourage the guys to go more vertical. Have you seen a lot of guys working on making that a point, getting rid of that muscle memory?
Yeah, there's been a little transition in that, and it's just 2 different coaching philosophies. One not necessarily better than the other, just one that I prefer is I do want a little bit more vertical push in some of the things that we do in some of the zone combinations and whatnot. So, yeah, there's been a little bit of transition with that, and it's one of the things that's still a work in progress.
How does a performance 300-plus yards pushing in the 400 area, how does that make you feel as a coach?
Humbled. You know, it's their work who's getting it done. It's the work of wide receivers. It's the work of the running backs. It's the work of everyone. But, you know, you never want to get too high after a performance, never want to get too low. It's kind of one of those things once you evaluate in the coaching profession, we often say, you know, it's never as good as you think. It's never as bad as you think. So I think it's a good starting point. I hope the guys can see the results of that game and build a little bit more confidence in some of the nuances that I'm teaching and continue to buy into the philosophies that we have offensively.
Looking ahead to this week, I don't know how good Morgan State was, but they only got, I think, roughly 43 yards rushing against that Bowling Green defense. What type of a challenge is that ahead of you?
Well, it's quite a challenge, and they've got a very seasoned, very experienced, and quality defense coordinator. They've obviously bought into that system that they're running at Bowling Green very quickly. You see them hitting their fits really well. They're playing fast. They play a multitude of fronts. They do have a multitude of pressures. They have third down pressures. They have run fit pressures. And the one thing that you really notice from that game is that guys are playing real fast to it. They're not getting out of fits. So we certainly do have our challenges ahead of us this week. And, it's the same thing I told those guys on Monday. As we continue to move forward through this season and with the greatest amount of respect towards Bowling Green, it is really about us. It's about us and our progression and us improving from week to week. And, I'm not going to necessarily look at what is the result of, this week's rushing totals or what is the result of this statistic. To me, it's going to be are we improving on the things that we need to improve on from this past Saturday?
And when that game was over, when you had a minute to just kind of sit back, relax a little bit, and kind of reflect on the day, what were the emotions of the first game at K-State, having a successful win, and then having a crowd that seemed to be really excited for all 60 minutes of that game?
Yeah, the crowd and Wildcat Nation was awesome. It was pretty electric out there. You could feel it. Certainly, we're very satisfied, very pleased with the win. My emotions were a little torn. There's a 4th down and 1 that, as an offensive line coach, it's funny. You linger sometimes on those things, but it's a great learning experience for us, and we got to move forward with it. And you enjoy it for a few hours, and then next morning you come in, you evaluate it, look at the things you need to improve on, and begin preparing for next week's opponent.
Pretty excited to get out there for the second one now?
Yeah, I am. I'm really excited to see how the guys improve. That's my biggest thing is, okay, what are we going to do from our progression this past week to moving forward into this week? And Coach talked about it a little bit earlier. We still have had just 40-some practices with these guys, and we're fortunate that you obviously have a little bit more preparation time for the first opponent. We don't have that luxury, and we are not going to have that luxury for the majority of the remainder of the season. So how quickly guys can pick up on some of the nuanced things, whether it's defensively or whether it's an addition of what we want to do offensively.
Well, Bowling Green did win their opening game, as Kansas State did. They defeated Morgan State 46-3 in the debut of head coach Scot Loeffler. Now let's go hear some thoughts from Coach Loeffler on facing the Kansas State Wildcats.
After watching all 3 phases of the game with Kansas State, you can feel on tape the culture left by Coach Snyder, and you can see the same culture brought in by Chris Klieman. They're super tough on tape. They play relentless on all 3 phases. The thing that's most impressive, I think, about them is they're tremendous technicians. We're going to have to be 100% on point to do what we need to do to go in there and compete and try to come out with a victory. But I think they really play extremely good team football. I'm hoping in my time here that I can get up and compliment staff, and I hope someday someone can compliment our program about how relentless they play, what great technicians they are, because this organization that Coach Snyder left and then Chris obviously took over as a tough, relentless, technician-sound football team. So we've got our hands full playing in a tough, hard, loud environment with a team that's extremely disciplined and extremely tough. You got to have laser beam focus. Everything's got to be wrapped around that play, and it's going to be a great challenge, and it's going to be a great learning experience, I think, for our kids to have the sense of urgency that they're going to need to have success.
It's a K-State sports tradition. It's Fitz's 5 Keys to Victory on the Powercat Pregame Podcast, presented by Robbins Motor Company.
And now it's time for my keys to victory. The full pregame analysis of my keys is for VIP customers of GoPowercat as premium content, but let's do a quick rundown right now. The Chris Klieman era of K-State football provided fans with a promising debut, but what do his Wildcats need to do to build off that victory over Nicholls? K-State meets the Bowling Green Falcons Saturday at 11 a.m. at Bill Snyder Family Stadium. What is K-State's path to success in this game? Well, here are my keys to the game. Key number one, continue to pound the opposition with that running game. The Wildcats found great success against Nicholls, but running the ball is the heart and soul of this offense, and adding to the success in game one with more power running is part of the building process. Key number two, catch the darn ball. K-State's receivers dropped about 4 balls in the season opener, which actually held back the Skylar Thompson-led offense from further success. When your quarterback hits you in the hands with a pass, catch it. Key number 3, don't get lost in the motion. If K-State's defense showed one flaw in the opener, it was a tendency to be fooled by motion and offensive shifts, both of which Bowling Green will do plenty of. Know your job and show improvement from what went wrong in week 1. Key number 4, apply some pressure. 0 quarterback sacks in the opener is a bit concerning. So in week 2, get after the quarterback in passing situations. Even if defensive coordinator Scotty Hazelton doesn't unleash the blitzes, this front 4 should be able to get to the quarterback. And key number 5, provide a bit more substance in special teams. Decent returns, good coverage, and a missed field goal. Honestly, we didn't learn much about special teams in the opener, so it would be nice to see at least one big play in this phase of the game. K-State Nation left Bill Snyder Family Stadium last Saturday with a spring in their collective step. Chris Klieman, his coaches, and players offered a strong sign that the program is in very good hands. With the schedule on the cusp of getting much more challenging, it's time to manhandle Bowling Green, keep the momentum going forward, and get ready for a trip to Mississippi State. My prediction is K-State 45, Bowling Green 10. And that will do it for this season's second edition of the Powercat Pregame Podcast, sponsored by Robbins Motor Company. And remember, we will have a postgame podcast. Brien, Hanley, and I will convene as soon as possible following Saturday's game, and that podcast will appear within hours of the conclusion of K-State and Bowling Green. And remember, folks, if you're not a subscriber to GoPowercat.com, it's time to get that done. If you're enjoying these podcasts, imagine the substance you will find behind the paywall for our VIP customers. If you sign up today, I will give you 30% off your annual subscriptions first year. Don't miss out on this opportunity to become part of the growing family at GoPowercat.com. And once again, our VIP subscribers will have another edition of The Sample with Josh Kinder, Travis Tannehill, Monty Spiller, and Jeff Hawkinson on Tuesday. 4 guys, 1 table, and a lot of talk about K-State football. Well, the Chris Klieman era of K-State football is upon us. It's going well, and can it continue? Make sure you don't miss out on a single thing by being part of the GoPowercat family and subscribing through Apple Podcasts or your favorite service to get every edition of the Powercat podcast. We deliver one every day, and the overtime edition comes on Friday, and of course that postgame podcast lands Saturday evening. I'm Tim Fitzgerald, and I will talk to you very soon.
You've been listening to the Powercat Pregame Podcast presented by Robbins Motor Company. Powercat Podcast. All rights reserved. GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street Publishing.